In 1629, beneath the stone shadow of Bamberg Castle, a German noblewoman named Anna Schwarz screams inside a torchlit chamber. Below her, a wooden wedge, no wider than 8 inches, is being driven slowly upward, splitting her body from below. But the scene isn't chaos. It's clinical. The executioner is taking notes, timing her breaths, recording how long she survives, as if conducting a cruel experiment. This machine of suffering was called the Spanish donkey. What follows will change everything you think you know about medieval justice, because this was never only about punishment. It was profit, and the truth about who ordered these sentences and why has been deliberately buried for 3 centuries. By the end of this video, you'll learn 3 things that will keep you up tonight. Why executioners called the device merciful compared to burning, which queen used it on her own nobility as part of a financial scheme, and why the wedge was engineered with terrifying medical precision, specifically for women's bodies. If you're hooked on history's darkest secrets, subscribe now, because at the 8-minute mark I'll show a suppressed document that even some academic historians tried to hide. Now step back to Europe between 1400 and 1700. The Inquisition rages. But what most history classes miss is how systematic and profitable these sentences became. The Spanish donkey, born in Spain's late 15th century Inquisition, spread through Germany, France, and the Low Countries like a moral contagion. Church records present a sanitized list: heresy, adultery, witchcraft. But imagine you are a wealthy widow in 1620s Bavaria. You own land, silver, and a stubborn independence. You refuse a marriage proposal from a powerful cleric's nephew. Within days, 3 strangers swear they saw you dancing with demons at midnight. You're seized. Your property is impounded by the church. Your sentence? The Spanish donkey. Don't picture a crude instrument. This was deliberate engineering, wood chosen for its properties, not its primitiveness. Metal would be too smooth, too fast. Properly carved wood splinters. It tears, it grips. It can be shaped with ridges that maximize tissue damage while deflecting from major arteries. The device stood roughly 7 feet tall, shaped like a large sawhorse, but where a flat beam would be, there was a single razor wedge set at exactly 45 degrees. The condemned were stripped, hoisted above it, and slowly lowered until the wedge engaged the perineum, the strip of flesh between genitals and anus. That first penetration was only the opening note. This story is not merely about physical pain. It's a system that weaponized suffering for economic and political gain, turning executions into spectacle and property confiscation into a form of state revenue. The engineering behind the donkey is where the horror turns deliberate. You need to understand one thing. The Spanish donkey was designed by people who knew anatomy better than many physicians of their day, and they used that knowledge to torture with precision. In 1577, a Spanish inquisitorial torturer named Pedro Ruiz compiled a manual, yes, an actual instruction book, called Matos Preciso de Agación. Hidden for centuries in Vatican archives, it wasn't fully translated into English until the late 20th century. Its technical notes are chilling. Ruiz details why the wedge angle must be 45 degrees, not 40 degrees, not 50 degrees. At 45 degrees, the wedge shears through soft tissue and muscle, but rides the pelvic bones, avoiding immediate catastrophic fractures. A sharper angle would penetrate too quickly and cause uncontrollable hemorrhage. A wider angle would stall. The wood was left intentionally rough. Splinters were an instrument. As the victim's weight forced the wedge deeper, shards up to 3 inches long would break off and lodge in internal tissue, thin enough to seal small vessels as they tore, preventing a rapid bleed but inflicting searing internal wounds. The result, agonizing pain for hours, sometimes days. Ruiz's manual goes further. Notes on weight distribution, on how a woman of 120 pounds settles to a predictable depth within 30 minutes. To hasten confession, executioners added ankle weights, never more than 40 pounds. Beyond that threshold, Internal hemorrhage might kill too quickly and ruin the extractive spectacle. The goal was never swift death. The goal was confession, and after confession, spectacle. Now picture that chamber again. The torchlight, the ropes creaking, the faint scratching of the executioner's quill as he times each convulsion. The crowd is silent, not from pity, but from participation in a system that eats property and pardons through forced admissions. This was torture optimized for extraction, legal, profitable, ritualized. Tomorrow, I will stitch this into the larger truth about how power and money shaped so-called pious justice. But before we move on, remember the document I mentioned. At 8 minutes, I'll reveal the page from Matteau's Preciso that scholars feared, the line that lays bare how calculated and commercialized this cruelty truly was. If you want more, if you want every suppressed doc and every forgotten confession, subscribe to Unchained Stories and hit the bell. This isn't just history. It's the anatomy of greed, disguised as righteousness. You feel each splinter catch, every muscle tear as the wedge drives upward. You try to lift yourself with your arms, but your wrists are bound behind your back. You try to shift your weight, anything to stop the blade, but the wedge is cut to a cruel tolerance. Any movement only forces it deeper. Average survival time, 4 to 6 hours, and here's the paragraph that should freeze your blood. Pedro Ruiz's manual contains a chapter titled Signs of False Confession. It teaches torturers how to tell when a victim is lying simply to end the agony, and if they judge the confession false, the instructions are explicit. Continue. Keep going until a true confession is wrung out. That bureaucratic cruelty is the point. The device is monstrous, yes? But the real horror is the ledger of names that led women to it, who decided they would be stripped, bound, and mounted on the donkey. And why? When historians dove into trial records from the 1600s, they found a pattern so systematic it can't be blamed on zeal alone. This was theft dressed up as piety. In 1998, historian Dr. Friedrich Mersber analyzed 847 execution files from Bamberg and Würzburg for the 5-year span 1627-1632. He cross-referenced those names with property deeds, tax rolls, and inheritance claims, and what he found made him physically ill. 87% of Spanish donkey victims were property owners, women who held land, businesses, or substantial assets. Not petty criminals, owners. Let me give you one casebook example. Margarita Herber owned 3 acres outside Bamberg and ran a thriving textile workshop. In 1628, she refused a marriage to her late husband's brother, who 2 months earlier had tried to buy her land at half value. Within days, 3 strangers, the local drunk who'd been paid in wine, a church scribe who'd never met her, and another witness, testified that she cavorted with demons. She was arrested. Her property was seized by the church the same day the papers were filed. Her workshop inventory was auctioned. Proceeds went to the court. Margareta survived 4 hours on the donkey, confessed, and was burned. Her land was sold back, this time to the brother, at the same half price he'd offered before. Mersber found this exact structure repeated 739 times in those 5 years. The same arrests, the same seizure, the same beneficiaries. But not every ledger entry was inevitable. One woman broke the pattern. Katharina Henno, the wealthiest woman in Cologne, owned 4 businesses and 2 townhouses. Accused in 1627, she endured 6 hours on the donkey without confessing. She was removed alive and returned to her cell. Why? Her adult son was a prominent lawyer who threatened public litigation that would expose church finances. They could not risk that transparency. Katharina lived. She then spent 3 years compiling a ledger pairing each Spanish donkey execution with the resulting property transfers. That ledger survives in Cologne's archives today, a paper trail of legalized plunder, and it gets darker still. Executioners did not act alone. Physicians, men sworn to heal, were paid to attend, to measure, to record. Welcome to the science of suffering. Imagine a doctor in 1630, trained in anatomy, pledged to preserve life, then offered double his salary to observe and note how long a human body can survive calibrated trauma. In 1689, a physician named Dr. Jan Schulz published observations anatomically supposedly about surgical procedures. Hidden in Appendix 7 are 23 grisly pages on the Spanish donkey, clinical diagrams, survival curves, and protocols. That appendix wasn't translated into English until 2003, and when forensic pathologists finally read it, they were horrified. Schulz's notes expose the mechanical physiology behind the torture. When a body is impaled from below, muscles reflexively contract around the wound, temporarily reducing bleeding. The wedge was designed to exploit that reflex, wide enough that muscle contraction paradoxically increases downward force, using the victim's own weight and physiology to drive the wedge deeper over time. In other words, the body's emergency response became part of the instrument, an engineered feedback loop that prolonged agony while preventing immediate death. Executioners quickly learned a dangerous truth. If a victim remained on the donkey longer than 2 hours, muscle fatigue could trigger a sudden descent, severing the femoral artery and causing almost instantaneous death. Such abrupt fatalities were considered a waste of spectacle. To prevent it, they devised a weight protocol. After 90 minutes, a 10-pound weight would be added to each ankle. The victim's descent became gradual, predictable, agonizingly prolonged. Schulz notes that with precise weight calibration, survival could be extended to an average of 8 hours. The record, 17 hours and 43 minutes, documented with chilling pride, but the truly haunting detail lies in Schulz's anatomical observations, made in real time. He recorded the wedge's angle as it cleaved through pelvic floor muscles, noted the sequential failure of tissue layers under pressure, and sketched the displacement of internal organs. This was not post-mortem study. He was observing women die and taking notes as if examining botanical specimens. In 1691, the German Medical Board revoked his license, not for attending executions, but for publishing these details that exposed church-sanctioned cruelty. 23 other physicians were implicated. Only one faced prosecution. Then, in 1689, history shifted. An executioner who had operated the Spanish donkey for 18 years broke his oath of silence. He walked into a monastery, demanded sanctuary, and handed the abbot a diary of 847 entries, each recording a victim, their survival time, and the attending church officials. But the diary's shock went far beyond documentation. Its revelations sparked riots across Bavaria and forced papal intervention. The executioner was Hans Schmidt. Over 18 years in Bamberg, he personally executed 312 women. At 56, he abandoned wealth and status to expose a secret the church had buried for over a century. His diary, now preserved in Munich's Bavarian State Library, records entries like this. June 1683. Victim, Elsa Hoffmann, age 44. Crime, witchcraft. Survival, 5 hours 22 minutes. Weight added, 35 Lelasby. Church officials present Bishop Ferner, Canon New Decker. Wager, 50 guilders. Closest estimate, 5 hours 30 minutes. Read that again. Church officials placed bets on how long women would survive. Executions became gambling entertainment. Schmidt documents 183 separate instances of betting between 1671 and 1688, totaling over 12,000 guilders, roughly 23 million today. Even more horrifying, officials sometimes altered the procedure to win wages. If a bishop bet on 7 hours and the victim faltered at 6, weights were removed to prolong agony. If the wager predicted a shorter survival, additional weights were applied to accelerate death. The scandal erupted when Schmidt's diary was published in 1690. Riots consumed Bavarian towns. Churches were vandalized. 3 bishops fled to France, and the Holy Roman Emperor demanded an investigation. In 1692, Pope Innocent XXV issued a papal bull banning the Spanish donkey, not for its cruelty, but because gambling had tarnished the church's credibility. Yet the ban was largely ignored. Local authorities continued using the device in secret for another 182 years. The last official Spanish donkey execution occurred in 1874 in rural Spain. Schmidt's diary alone documents 847 deaths in Bamberg. Across Europe, historians estimate 5,000 women perished on the Spanish donkey between 1490 and 1874. The true number may never be known. Post 1692, churches systematically destroyed records. The surviving documents owe their existence to those brave enough to defy authority, like Katharina Hennot and Hans Schmidt, preserving the dark science of human suffering for history to remember. Today, the few remaining Spanish donkey devices sit locked away in museum storage, hidden from the public. Officially, they are deemed too disturbing for general audiences, but the real reason is darker. They are tangible proof of systematic femicide disguised as justice, a truth that institutions still hesitate to acknowledge. Yet, the legacy of the Spanish donkey didn't end in 1874. In 1948, when the United Nations drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 5 declared, "No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment." That single sentence exists because of devices like the Spanish donkey. The Eighth Amendment of the American Constitution, banning cruel and unusual punishment, was shaped by men who studied the Inquisition, witnessing these horrors firsthand, and vowed never to allow them in the New World. Modern international law, the Geneva Conventions, and the entire framework of human rights we now take for granted are built on the graves of women like Anna Schwarz, Margarita Herber, and the 847 victims meticulously recorded in Hans Schmidt's diary. Their suffering was not meaningless. It exposed the terrifying consequences of institutions weaponizing pain for profit and power. Now, consider this. If you had lived in 1680s Bavaria, witnessing these atrocities, would you have spoken out, risking your own life, knowing you could end up on the Spanish donkey next? Every generation faces this question in different forms. When do you confront institutional evil, and when do you remain silent? If this video disturbed you as deeply as it disturbed me to research, you need to watch the next episode on the Judas Cradle, a torture device historians tried to erase from history. Click the link in the description, hit subscribe, and prepare to uncover the darkest corners of human history that textbooks refuse to teach. I'll see you in the next one.